Hey there, listener. Are you an optimistic person? Someone who sees the best possible outcome, even in the bleakest of situations? In the business of pushing back, it can be easy to fixate on the negative. After all, we're up against wealthy and powerful forces, and pushing back against them requires that we understand the distressing realities of things like financialization, poverty, and homelessness. How can we hope to change broken systems if we don't understand them and their consequences through and through? But that fixation can lead to despair, and despair to burnout. Finding ways to stay energized, to stay optimistic, is key to keeping momentum and making the greatest impact possible. Today's guest is a veteran of the housing and human rights world and is no stranger to the despair that can come with it. David Ireland has extensive experience in the fields of housing, homelessness, and community development. He's worked with a variety of organizations and initiatives aimed at improving housing conditions, addressing homelessness, and advocating for housing rights. As chief executive of World Habitat, David works to identify and promote innovative housing solutions worldwide that prioritize the needs of vulnerable populations. David's work, like that of many advocates, does involve darkness. He sees in real time the ways that the law can worsen housing crises and make it harder for projects to succeed. But on the other hand, through the World Habitat Awards, David's work also gives him the opportunity to see innovative housing projects from around the world and to help them succeed. It's the kind of positivity that we could all use a little more of. David joins Fredrik and Leilani today to talk about his behind-the-scenes role in Push the Film, his first-hand experience witnessing positive change, and shares just a little about some of the incredible projects World Habitat has been able to support over the years. This is Pushback Talks.
I'm Fredrik Gerten, and I'm the filmmaker.
And I'm Leilani Farha, and I'm the advocate.
So, a filmmaker and an advocate.
Back at it.
What are we doing every day? What are you doing?
Weeping. Weeping.
Weeping, yeah.
I'm weeping. I am very distraught in an ongoing basis about what's happening in Gaza. It gets worse by the day, by the minute. But I am heartened. Things are changing on the ground. There's a lot of movement around the world in support of the Palestinians. So, yeah.
And what is happening right now at Columbia University is amazing.
It's incredible.
We filmed Professor Stiglitz there for Push, and to kick students out of their careers, it's like it could end. It's like it's very, very strong. I don't know if this has happened in the history of academia before. It's crazy.
It's pretty crazy. And of course, what people may not know or realize is that Edward Said, who's a Palestinian guru, a man extraordinaire, now deceased, he was a linguist, I think. And I mean, he wrote The Question of Palestine. He wrote Orientalism. He went to Columbia. He was a professor at Columbia. And so I think there's a real resonance right now for the students at Columbia. And of course, it's creating a domino effect across the United States at these major institutions, all the Ivy Leagues, and it's really incredible. So, as long as we keep the focus on Palestine,
It's super interesting. We've talked about that in our South Africa episode, and I've just been to South Africa now. Little bit looking into. Well, actually, I've been filming for a new project. I won't tell you anything more.
No more. Yeah. I know you like to keep it close. You keep it close.
Filmmakers have to make films. That's the job, isn't it?
It is.
So, but I mean, I was in Cape Town, and Gaza is so present. There was like big buildings painted in the Palestinian flag. It was like everywhere. It was like it's so strong. And of course, as we talked about it in that episode, is that for the South Africans, they remember what apartheid was. And apartheid is like it's only 30 years since they scrapped it, you know.
Yeah.
So it's actually 30 years this year that Mandela became president. So it's a very short time in history, and the wounds are very alive.
Right.
The wounds of apartheid and colonialism.
Exactly.
The same thing we talk about in Israel-Palestine. But we have a guest, you know that?
We do.
You have a guest.
We have a guest.
We have a guest. And our guest is a person that you work much more with, but I met David Ireland, who is the chief executive of World Habitat. We will explain better what that is, but we met because David helped us when we started to shoot Push in 2017 in London. So welcome to Pushback Talks, David.
Thank you, Fredrik, and thank you, Leilani. Thank you for inviting me on, and it's great to see you again.
Yeah, and when we were in London, we met several people, but you introduced us to a very nice man called Jerry Flynn. And Jerry was a tenant in a estate called Haygate Estate that suddenly was turned down. It was built in the 70s, and they took down 3,000 apartments and kicked people out. Not everybody got a replacement, and they went far. And then they built a very speculative place, and they renamed it to Elephant Park. And just to give a little taste of this, let's listen to Jerry Flynn in Push.
Well, we're walking through the new buildings, the new estate, which is now called Elephant Park, which replaces the Haygate Estate, where I used to live. A bit empty feeling.
Like, look, so many, all of them empty.
Yeah. The flats, many of the homes in this part of the development were sold in Hong Kong and Singapore. When they're sold overseas, they're not necessarily sold for people to live in. They're sold as investments.
Welcome to my nightmare. This is, cell block 1. This is my place. We've had no heat all through April, no hot water all through April. There's water leaking underneath the sink. It's just, I need a whole new window because the windows don't close, they don't match. New owners have taken over. We haven't met them, we haven't seen them, we don't know anything about them. It could be Frosty the Snowman for all I know. And they're trying everything to evict us.
Wouldn't like to sort of romanticize what it was like before.
Right.
But it was an ordinary council estate, lots of ordinary families in it. And I suppose at this time of day, most of them would have been off to work and off to school and off to college and so on.
This is where I grew up. And I'll be hell bent and bound if I'm going to be pushed out of here, or bullied out of here, for that matter.
Yeah, so there was a little taste of two people from Push. The other man we listened to here was Phil Molnar in Parkdale, Toronto. He lived in a rooming house that then now has been turned into some kind of luxury student studios, something like that. And I'm afraid that he might be sleeping rough because he was like in that kind of situation. But David, let's go back to London. I mean, this is a very strong story of turning an old social housing estate into a luxury area.
Yeah, it's extraordinary. And I think when you look at it, it's indicative of a lot of what's happened in the UK and elsewhere around the world. You're right. And the start of the story was a social housing estate where 3,000 people lived, people on low incomes. In inner London, I mean, this is 20 minutes walk from Big Ben. It's right in the middle of London, but a working class area. And at the end of the story, you have a expensive upmarket, privately owned estate. And you're like, how did you get from one to the other? And I think, I remember I was living in South London over all of that time. And the Haygate estate, I mean, it got many problems. It was not a perfect place at all. And the council who owned the estate, I think quite rightly thought this place needs regenerating. We need to do something about this place. And the mechanism for doing it, the means for doing it was you get a private developer in, you sell the whole estate to a private developer. The private developer knocks down the estate, builds new buildings, but builds them much more densely. So you end up with 3 times as many apartments. And then a third of them go back to the council or back to social housing, and 2/3 of them can be sold privately. So that was the intention, the aim at the beginning of it. But what happened is there's this thing called a viability assessment, and it's something which was introduced in the law in the UK in about 2012, and it just gets developers off the hook. So the idea is, I think there's a sort of a reasonable sort of idea behind it, is you don't want a developer to go bust to in the middle of a development. That's not in anybody's interest. So that's what it's designed for. But it's got overused, and it's sort of used every single time. So what the viability assessment is the developer gets the contract, gets the planning permission. There's a planning rule in England, in most places, that you get if you're building a big housing development, you have to make a portion of it available for affordable housing. So that might be something between 20 and 40% of the homes have got to be for social housing. And worth saying, I think, that developers make a profit on social housing. It's not like they're giving these properties away for free. They make a return on the houses which are built for social housing, but not as much. And so they want to maximise the amount that they develop privately. And so the viability assessment is developer goes off, private consultant comes in and does an assessment, and it always comes back and say, oh, well, no, there is not enough profit margin in this development. We will have to reduce things. We'll have to knock things out. And the thing that gets knocked out straight away is the affordable housing. And it gets reduced down. Other things can go as well. You can say, well, maybe we can't design it quite as nicely. We haven't got we can't put as much for the community centre or whatever. Those things get knocked out. But it's the affordable housing which really, really goes down. And what happened here was that the assessment said it really isn't viable to have any social housing at all. So the social housing gets eliminated out of this development. And they do some other types of affordable housing, so shared ownership, so you rent half and buy half, but it's not a replacement for social housing. And then the whole thing gets developed. And then lo and behold, when you look at it at the end, well, actually this viability assessment wasn't really necessary anyway. The developer, an Australian company called Lend-Lease, made £100 million profit out of it.
£100 million.
£100 million. And there's no mechanism to go back.
Leilani, that sounds like a good business. you're
I'm in the wrong business. We all know I'm in the wrong business.
You're in the wrong business.
In my bunker. Here I am in my bunker.
So how do you when you hear this story, because we didn't know that when we were shooting that this Australian company would make £100 million profit. And I mean, we know that they were selling the apartments in packages in Singapore and Hong Kong on fairs. And, some people bought 10 apartments, some bought 5. I remember walking around, you could see all the key boxes of the Airbnbs. But what I understand, there are still a lot of empty apartments, even today, and we're talking about 8-9 years later. Leilani, how do you react on this?
It's astounding. I've been doing this work for 25 years. I still find it mind-boggling that governments, I shouldn't say that governments would allow anything like this to happen. To absolutely abandon the idea of social housing, basically, in that area, an area that was dominated by social housing. Okay, maybe decrepit, maybe it needed to be refurbished, retrofitted, all of that. But it is astounding to me, and to just hand it over to developers who have no social conscience, no set of social values from which they work. It is why I love the human rights framework, and I am like a broken record on this, and I insist on human rights. Yeah. Because if governments were imposing a human rights framework, this couldn't be allowed to happen. It's considered what we use this terrible term, retrogression. But basically, you're not allowed to go backward. You can't make things worse for people. Yeah. And getting rid of social housing makes things worse.
Some people will call this gentrification, but we would probably use the words of Saskia Sass and call this land grabbing, because it's actually grabbing working class people's homes and land, and then they turn their spot in London into a place where investors can play.
Yeah, but let's be clear what David said, right? David, you said that this viability assessment is in law. So what's so evil is it's entrenched. That's the fabric of our society, law, right? So the supporting of developers and profit-driven housing and financialized housing, et cetera, is, as David said, it's being entrenched in our laws. It's made possible through our laws. That's a huge problem, right? That's why we call it a structural problem.
Yeah. It is, and I think, Leilani, I think there's an added problem with this as well, because what happens is all developers in England will use this viability assessment for larger developments, where they're giving, so it becomes the norm. Everybody uses it. And what that means is there's bigger profit margins in the development, but that also then means that the land value becomes greater because you know that you can make more out of it. So there's another effect of it, is that it actually puts up land prices, which then feeds through into putting up house prices as well, and makes the affordability worse as well. So you get this sort of double hit with it. You're restricting the amount of social housing. And Shelter say there was a report Shelter did a few years ago, so the UK housing charity.
And Shelter is an organisation that works with homeless issues, in the UK.
Yeah, it is. And it does some really good research as well. And they found that essentially we, through these viability assessments, we're losing 75% of the potential social housing that we could have. So that's what gets knocked out by these viability assessments. And in addition, you're putting up land price, so you're making the affordability problems worse.
Yeah, and that's the name of the game. It's that value. What is the value? The valuation, driving up the value of land is the name of the game for all of these developers, because that's where they gain, right? So they buy low. You know this, Blackstone, buy low, sell high, right? That's what they do. So they buy low, they do whatever they build these things on the land, they push up the price of the land, then they can sell high.
Buy, fix, sell. That's the story.
That's right.
Buy, fix, sell. David and Leilani, I mean, we released Push in 2019, and a lot of people have come to us and say, oh shit, now I understand this, how bad this is. And we and I think Leilani's language of housing is a human right has really reached out globally in many ways, thanks to her work and also of the film. But then when I come back to the places that we shot in the film, if it's London, if it's Toronto, if it's Barcelona or other cities, in Berlin, the situation is worse. It's like it's kind of bad news, So how do you see this? Are you also depressed? Like sometimes I can feel that Leilani is that shit. It just rolls on. Or can you see the light in the tunnel somewhere?
Well, of course, acknowledge the problems and see the same things that you do, and of course. But I mean, I kind of have this privileged position. The organisation I work for, World Habitat, we get to see all these amazing housing projects where people are really making a difference. And we have this thing called the World Habitat Awards, this competition, which every year 100 to 200 submissions come in, and it's a delight really seeing all of these things. And we get the privilege to get to know some of the people really well, and we help support some of them as well. So there's many things that are wrong, but I think there's many untold stories, and there's many fantastic successes as well, which don't always get quite the same publicity as some of the negatives.
That's now you make me happy because we need the smiles and we need the hope and we need inspirational stories. And I think part of the idea with this podcast is actually to send out inspiration. And my last film, I don't know if you've seen it, Breaking Social, is very much about people fighting back, and also about that we are happier when we fight back. Hope is something that makes us. When we are hopeful, we are fighting better. So we will use you as the good news man today. So, and I know Leilani was recently in Puerto Rico. And now I understand that you were in the jury of of World Habitat Awards, and you gave the awards to this project in Puerto Rico. So tell us, Leilani and David, tell us about the project in Puerto Rico. Why should we smile when we listen to it?
Yeah, David, do you want to talk about it? And then I'll just give a little update from my side.
I'd love to. Well, I'm really glad you went, Leilani, because it's one of those places. It does uplift you, because I think it's a story where the poorer people actually won, and that's what's great about it. So Caño Martin Peña, it's what you might call an informal settlement. It was originally built on what was the outskirts of San Juan, the capital of Puerto Rico. And it was built on reclaimed land. It was sort of self-built houses. Ordinary people built these houses. And at the time, nobody was really interested because it was on the mudflats. It was on the edge, not really that interesting. But San Juan has grown, and it's sort of grown around Caño Martin Peña. And this land is now prime real estate. Suddenly it's like in the center of the city rather than being on the edge. And it has all of the things. Whenever that happens, and that's a story which you will have both seen it sort of many times around the world. People get picked off, and that's what was happening there. Is people were going in, developers were going in, buying up individual properties, playing people off against each other, offering them sums of money which to them sounded a lot, but in fact was underselling it and meant that they couldn't afford to buy anything else. But what they did was they realised that together they could be stronger, and they used a thing called a community land trust, which is a means where you pool the ownership of all of the houses. So instead of each person owning their individual house, they each own the buildings, but the land is collectively owned, and they each own a share of the land. And suddenly, when you put a lot of them, and it is a lot in Caño Martin Peña, it's thousands of houses, suddenly that's actually a powerful entity. And collectively, the value of all of that is actually worth something, so you can raise money against it and you can start doing improvements. So they started introducing infrastructure, so improving the drainage, improving the water supply, improving the roads. But it also meant that they could employ lawyers who could actually challenge some of the encroachment that they were getting and point out some of the offers that they were getting were not worth touching. And they've actually developed something. So they've secured their future. And it's around the Caño is a canal which was flooding and causing all sorts of environmental problems to the area.
Just a short info from me that we did a podcast with the people in Puerto Rico. So if you go back and look in the catalog of our podcast, you can find it. And we also did another podcast about community land trust based in France. So it's also out there somewhere if you go back in our archive. Community land trust seems to be a very inspirational way of fighting back.
It is, and this community in Puerto Rico is something special. David so rightly described. I mean, what's nice about community land trust isn't just that it's an amazing legal mechanism to maintain a hold on land, often for lower income and low income people. But it actually also the coming together to create the trust can help create community in new ways and fortify the community. And this is a very intact community. It was amazing. I mean, it had that old world Puerto Rico vibe, which is being eroded in many other neighborhoods. Airbnb is really taking over, which is why I, in fact, was in Puerto Rico, was to meet with people and talk about the threat that is Airbnb, something we've also talked about on this podcast. So I visited the community, and I mean, first of all, they just so warmly greeted me and like they all knew that I was a jury member of the Habitat Awards and that I had contributed to them winning the award. They literally were embracing me so warmly, physically embracing me and hugging me and saying that the award had a huge impact on their community. Something as a jurist, I hope, I think, we give these awards, it's a validation of work. I hope it has some flow-on effect. It was clear, and they made it clear to me that it really had. It showed to the governor and the legislators in Puerto Rico that they had the backing of the international community. And this award really has been used by them to keep moving forward and keep their hold on the land. And I mean, I tell you, they did a screening of Push. It was amazing. They have a very beautiful community center. They served me a really lovely meal. And I mean, just,
I want to go. I want to go.
You got to go.
I know Leilani. I know David. Here, hug me.
That's right. Well, they'll hug you now. They've seen the film. They loved it. It was a sold out, so to speak.
Yeah.
Every seat was filled. The community was really engaged. And they could really see, Fredrik, that the film resonated, with their reality, that they are tied to the various people that you expose in the film, whether it's, in Chile or in South Korea, et cetera. So really, it was a beautiful moment for me. And to make these connections, that's not the only award winner I've met, but it's one of the few that I've met.
Yeah. So the community land trust thing, I don't know. It's not very well known in my circles of friends. So, but is this something that is coming strong now, David?
Yeah, I think it's got a lot of potential. And I mean, what I love about the people in Puerto Rico, the Caño Martin Peña, is they've been so generous with their time with others, and they've been helping people in other countries to develop their own models. And there's something really exciting happening in Brazil at the moment. So in Rio, inspired by the work in Puerto Rico, there's community land trusts now beginning to take place. Some of the favelas are starting to form community land trusts. And it really does something very special, because in the same way that the people in Puerto Rico were under threat, the favelas in Brazil will be under threat as well as the land becomes of greater value.
But tell me now from Brazil, I think it's really interesting how we have a favela, and some of them are up on the very beautiful hill slopes looking over the city. Okay, we want to try to make the land into a land trust. How do you go about it? How do they do it?
Well, it's a long old process, because I mean it's got to be the whole community buys into it, and they've got to understand the benefits of what they're doing. And sometimes it's a loss if you've got title of your land and you're pooling it with others. That's quite a decision to make. But the challenges they've had in Brazil is that they've got to get the law right. So the law didn't allow it to the formation of a community land trust. So there's been some amazing lobbying at a federal level and also at a city and state level. And they seem to be really making progress with that. So all of those things have got to happen along with building the community. And what you end up with is something similar to what they have in Puerto Rico, which is everybody's got a stake in the ownership of the land.
But let's say if the land in Rio are owned by no one or the city, so because the houses are illegally built, but long time ago, of course, and of course people own their houses. You can still sell a house in a favela, of course, but the land is. So do you need to get the city on board, I guess?
Yeah. So I mean, what it's doing at the same time is regularizing the ownership of the land, because it's in a sense who does own it. Some of these favelas have been there 100 years. People have lived there. Generations of the same families have lived there, and who owns it other than them? And so being able to come with a mechanism to say, instead of individual ownerships for individual plots of land and individual houses, you've got a system where a whole community can do it together. Actually has got real benefits, and in the same way that you had in Puerto Rico, it means that you can get infrastructure improvements, and the community can do lots of things that it couldn't do if it was all spliced up into little parts. So I think it's quite exciting. I think we're sort of seeing at the beginning of something in Rio, and we're seeing it in Europe as well. So the first community land trust came into Brussels about 10 years ago. It was great to see them growing, and they actually won the World Habitat Awards 2 years ago. So them growing and providing a really fantastic mix of properties and being able to provide homes for people who couldn't afford them otherwise. So a lot of West African communities in Brussels who were being displaced out of places like Molenbeek, sort of inner areas of Brussels. And Brussels Community Land Trust has done the same kind of job of sort of finding empty buildings, finding plots of land, bits of on top of supermarkets, anywhere where they can find some space to create some homes and provide something for people that wouldn't be able to afford it otherwise. So it's a new way of providing social housing.
And this will then, in some way, exist on side of the market. You know, it will not be a part of the traditional housing market.
That's right. Yeah. And there's normally some provisions around what can be done. It does allow for intergenerational security. So often in a land trust, you can pass on where you're living to your children, but often in a land trust, you would not be able to sell it. Or if you can sell, you can't sell at market rates. And there's different land trusts do it differently. But the whole idea is to not be just like in the market, so to speak, and competing in the market. The idea is exactly as David said, which is what's so lovely is providing people with security who are low income or lower income and who wouldn't otherwise maybe have even access to that kind of security and an affordable home. And this idea of regularization is becoming quite, I mean, when I was rapporteur and traveling the world and going to different regions, and still now I see it's becoming quite common, and I think it's becoming more understood, especially where the informal settlement, so-called, is on public land, because it's now understood that maybe public land should be used for public value, and public value is keeping poor people housed. These are often incredibly intact communities. I mean, I've been to informal settlements that are like little cities in Nigeria, everywhere I've been. They're like that, right? You have the local barber and you have the little shops and you have all the informal economy flourishing. And so I think governments are starting to realize, well, we're never going to be able to build for these people and provide for these people. They're already providing for themselves anyway. They just happen to be on public lands. We can regularize it and keep them there. I like to see this as more of a movement. Of course, there's big pressures from developers.
But would this be something also for Canada?
We have land trusts in Canada, yeah, and it's a growing, similar to the way they're done in Belgium. A little bit different depending, but it's also growing for sure.
Because I haven't seen it. I haven't seen it here in Sweden, for example.
No.
So we need to this podcast is actually promoting the land trust. That's good. Okay, we have a mission. David, you've been sending out these awards for a long time. So I guess you meet a lot of inspiring people from all over the world. Do you have some favorites out there you can talk about?
I do. Yeah.
Without saying that the other ones are not as smart, but I mean, it's kind of, because this is about inspiration. You know, how people want to hear. Wow, I mean, already you said Rio Favela. You get the picture, and also the community in Puerto Rico, and then in Brussels. So give us more inspiration.
There was, I think, one of the things which will always stay with me was. I've had the opportunity to visit rural Pakistan, I think three times with this job, and there was this extraordinary woman called Yasmin Lowry, who she was a big name star architect in Pakistan. She's built sorts of sort of big classy office blocks and hotels and things like that, and she got to an age and she retired from that and thought, what I want to do is I want to help people in poor rural communities in Pakistan. And she started off this piece of work, and it's really quite extraordinary. I mean, I find Pakistan a sort of a wonderful country, and a sort of with so many problems to it. But you know, you get out of the cities, and it's suddenly so remote. And the Indus Valley in Sindh, big flat area, and there are these villages which you could go there and you could think, well, if you come here 400 years ago, it would have looked exactly the same. It's amazing, really. But the people there have got life's really hard. It's a feudal system where a remote landlord owns the land, and people struggle to survive. And I think what I've sort of seen I mean, over the times I've been there, you've sort of seen it change. Is this is sort of climate change, the effects of climate change are sort of happening. So there was the River Indus floods. There was terrible floods 2 or 3 years ago. You remember, sort of basically a quarter of the country was underwater, and that's not a sort of like a one-off random thing. You know, if you look where the water comes from, it comes from the Hindu Kush Mountains. The glaciers are melting. It will continue happening. The floods are here to stay. And the other thing that's sort of extraordinary about it is the trees have gone. You know, people have cut down the trees for fuel and for construction. The sort of scrubby sort of bushes left.
But now you're telling us about the bad things. I want to hear inspirational stories.
It's coming, Fredrik. It's coming.
It's coming.
I want now.
It's coming.
So, but I still need to just explain what this does to people, because the structure of the houses, the simple houses, is 4 walls made of mud, and traditionally you'd have a timber roof. And both of these environmental problems affect these things. So when you get a flood, the heavy rain, the mud dissolves, the house is in danger of collapse. With no trees, what people do is they are sort of importing steel instead. And what that means is when the house collapses, actually it's dangerous. And I had this photograph, and I don't know whether I've got it still, but there's a family sitting outside their house in the pouring rain because it's too dangerous to be inside the house when it's raining. So this extraordinary woman, Yasmin, went out and made contact with lots of these villages and started to do something about this. And what she did, I thought, was a sort of brilliant way of what is the minimum intervention you can have to have the maximum output. And so what she did is she realized that the 2 things that you needed to solve these problems were a different way of thinking about the mud. So instead of just mud, you mix it with lime, and then it's got some waterproof properties, and you maybe put it on a bit of a plinth so it can, you know, sort of hold back the water. And instead of using steel, you use bamboo, which is as strong as steel but much lighter and cheap and available in Pakistan. And so what she did is she trained people, and her sort of bit of genius was realizing, instead of trying to convince the people who are already building, let's just go to some other people. And the people that she homed in on was the women in the village who weren't got preconceived ideas about how you build. And what she did is she trained them, and they became like sort of mini architects, building supervisors, helping other people build their own homes and taking a fee to help it happen. And then each of those then recruited some more women to work with them, and then it passed on and on and on. And she ended up with thousands, literally thousands, of what these barefoot entrepreneurs, as she called them, of these women who were going out with these quite simple changes in techniques, but actually ones that solved the problem. And within really quite a short time, I mean, we were going a year after this project had first started, and you go to village after village where every house had been rebuilt with these techniques. And it wasn't enough to withstand the floods which came a couple of years ago, but it did provide homes for people for 6-7 years, and also has given them a skill set which they can then rebuild and build back better than they had before. So I thought it was amazing. I really thought it was a stunning project.
That's an inspirational story, Leilani. It's
I was a judge on that one.
Oh, so you're behind all these stuff.
Well, I'll be honest.
I always wonder what you do when you don't have time to talk to me. Now I know you're in the jury meetings.
Well, if I recall, I have to be honest. So for me, one of the issues around an amazing project like that is, does it create systemic change? And of course, it doesn't. It doesn't stop climate change. Yeah, it does. It's a mitigation strategy, basically. But what convinced me was this, I mean, the story, I mean, and David tells the story so well. When you're thinking about all of these women who are being empowered to do something to make their lives better. And in my experience traveling the world...
To make their neighbor's life better also.
Yeah, exactly. But in my experience traveling the world and meeting with people in really horrible housing circumstances, what I've heard so many times is parents in particular crying with me and saying that they're humiliated and embarrassed that they can't do more for their children. And like men, women, mothers, aunts, like that idea that they cannot provide safety, security, whatever for their children is huge. And so when I thought about all these women ensuring better lives for their families and their neighbors' families, et cetera, I just thought, whoa, this is huge. And so few housing projects and programs really hone in on women and women's power and ingenuity and capacity. And so it was a winner.
But I could hear another part of Leilani saying, yeah, but this is just some small things in the corner. The big enemy is still financialization, the speculation, the land grabbing. So, I mean, we're...
Polluters.
I mean, we still have this kind of big money operating and actually destroying communities day by day in big cities like London, or in my city, Malmo, or in Ottawa, where you are based, or in Pakistan, or in Mexico, or wherever we go. So where are we in this balance, Leilani?
I don't know, but David, I think, wanted to add something.
Well, I did. So I just thought there's little bits. You can talk about the sort of damage that big amounts of money do, but sometimes little amounts of money can have a really positive transformative effect. And I remember one of the first villages we went to see in Sindh, we met one of these barefoot entrepreneurs, and so she'd earned, I don't know, $200 or $300 or something like this through her work, which was, you know, before she'd had nothing. So that was a big change. And what she'd done is she worked out how she could invest that in a way which actually made a difference to her family, her village. And she bought a second-hand motorbike. You know, it's just like a 100cc thing. And that meant she was the only person in the village who could get from the village to the town, because nobody else had a motorized vehicle. The town's 20 miles away or something. So she suddenly becomes one of the most important people in the village, because she can take people on the back of the motorbike. She's a taxi service. She can also get goods from the town. And then she earns a little bit more out of this. And she when we went to see her, I've never seen anything quite like it. She got somebody to kind of dismantle this motorbike and then reassemble it as like a tricycle, motorized tricycle, but with wooden benches. And what it meant is you could actually get 6 people sitting on the back of this. And you could put a little cart on the back, and suddenly she's a taxi service. She can take 6 people to the town. So that means people in the village can now get employment in the town. They can also trade in the town. They can buy goods. They can sell goods.
Right.
And so the surplus of things that they're making, you know, they're cooking extra food or whatever and taking it and selling it in the market. It's amazing. It's absolutely stunning.
I think it's amazing. I think it's beautiful and it's inspirational, and it's very important to tell these stories. I just wanted to hit back on my cynical comment here, and Leilani just tried to avoid me. You know, so how do we combine these struggles?
Yeah.
The positive, small stories, inspirational stories, we need them, and that's why we need World Habitat. Mm-hmm. But we also need to fight the big thing that is rolling out that still makes life harder now than it was when we released Push 5 years ago.
Absolutely. I think World Habitat and the awards actually do award projects that are aimed at the systemic as well. There was the
Land Trust
project.
seems to be like that, I think.
Land Trust is like that. There's
really cool,
a really interesting project out of Lebanon. I forget what it's called again. Project Work.
Was Public Works Studio.
Public Works Studio, yeah. They're doing really interesting, what I would call systemic and legal work. And we all know, those of us who are trying to change the world, we know that it happens at both levels. We need the granular, the micro, the small acts that change people's lives in that immediate way. That's super important, because we need people. We need people. Families need mums, you know, et cetera. But we also know that we need these bigger campaigns. We need to challenge the big actors. We need to really bring down a system, or at least
we need the governments on our side, or the
do.
governments on the side of of people who needs a home.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. And it's often those smaller stories that move governments. I've been, doing a lot of lobbying and advocacy in my life, and it's that small story where I can say, well, don't you want this, the motorcycle mama, don't you want, look at what's possible if you were to just change your policies, if you were to just keep at bay some of these developers, tame them with your laws rather than incentivize them with your laws, So I think it happens at both levels. And each of us decides, I think, where we're going to put most of our eggs, So I've decided as an advocate, I decided that quite young in my career that I was better at the macro stuff, the big systems stuff. That's who I am. I'm a big picture person. And so that's where I'm going to put my energy. And that's why I agreed to be rapporteur and all of that. But there are other people who are doing really important and good work, and they know they're better placed to do it at that local level in the immediate, provision of services and assistance. So yeah, we're all in it together.
Exactly. We need both. We're almost time to sum it up.
Yep.
But, I mean, David, what makes you go in the morning after your first cup of tea? What still makes you want to go to your job?
Well, I think there's always more of these projects. You always learn something new, and I think the thing that I just love is once you can prove something works, you dismantle an argument. So much of the argument as that won't work. You can't do that. Once you've got a project which says you can do it, then you dismantle that argument. And we haven't really sort of gone to talking about sort of ending homelessness, but I mean there's some wonderful examples there about how you can end homelessness. Countries have done it, cities have done it. And so once you've got those examples, you can go to another one and say, well, if you do this, it's proven this has an effect and it works. So you've got the sort of the level which I think I love operating on, which is being able to get individual projects to work better and being able to transfer it to somewhere else, provide the material which Leilani needs, and we need Leilani and others who campaign at a national level to say, we need this at a national level, we need this at an international level. We all need an access to a right to housing, but you've got to have the examples to be able to demonstrate that it's possible.
It's cool. And yeah, I'm happy to know both of you now. I mean, that's the people who are doing cool stuff. I think that makes me happy. I mean, in my job as a filmmaker and also as a co-host of this podcast, is that I meet a lot of cool people who do stuff. And I think it's super important for all of us to send out good stories, inspirational stories, because it's very easy to get stuck in sending out everything that is fucked, everything that is wrong. So, and then you can get depressed and you can become cynical so thank you for your work. And we will put up on the episode text a link to your webpage so we can everybody can check out inspirational projects from World Habitat.
Thank you, Fredrik.
And maybe Leilani can put up something too that you think we should check out.
I rely on World Habitat for my hope and optimism, so we'll keep it there. Yeah.
Okay.
It's been a pleasure, David, to have you on the podcast.
Oh, well, thank you for inviting me. I've really enjoyed it, and it's great to speak to you both, and all power to you. Fantastic.
Yeah, thank you. And Leilani, I guess we have to talk again.
We'll talk again.
We'll talk again, and there's more episodes coming out. And I didn't tell you, we now have 161 countries where we have listeners.
Wow. A new one. Which one? Which part of the world?
I think the new one is a place where a lot of rich people live, and also a lot of letterboxes close to Switzerland. Like yeah, it's something with Stein.
Yeah, Liechtenstein.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I
knew it was one of the L's. I was like, Luxembourg or Liechtenstein?
Oh, well, Luxembourg is further away from Switzerland. I don't know.
True.
You North Americans, you don't really know the European map, but
no.
You do.
Liechtenstein. I didn't know they I didn't know they weren't already listening. So
we found a listener. So you are very welcome, our friend in Liechtenstein. Write to us and tell us about some amazing stories from Liechtenstein.
Well, we have an amazing story right here at WG. Apparently, I think it might be Sebastian, who does the sound for the podcast and WG Film. No, it's Kirsten, who works at the shift and produces the podcast, says that she used to work for the son of the Duchess of Liechtenstein.
Oh my God! So maybe it's the son of the Duchess that is listening to us. That would be cool. Then we can move on to the other part here. That it's how do we fund this, dear son of the Duchess? We don't have any budget for this podcast, and so if you can, if you just sign a check, and we will be really happy. Yeah. And if you're not, you can go into Patreon and support the podcast. Well,
I met royalty in Luxembourg. Maybe we're better to go after Luxembourg to support the podcast.
Let's go for royalties. What about you have a king in England, I've heard. Yeah, so these days.
We do.
And
maybe we can go after the king.
He's progressive, I've heard. Interested in... Anyway, stop it. Thank you very much. And see you soon. Thank you very much, David. Thank you, Leilani.
Thank you.
Thanks, Fredrik. Keep hope alive.
Let's keep the hope alive.
Pushback Talks is produced by WG Film. To support the podcast, become a patron by going to patreon.com/pushbacktalks. Follow us on social media at make_the_shift and push_the_film. Or check out our websites, maketheshift.org, pushthefilm.com, or breakingsocialfilm.com.